So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'm Sarah Moy, I'm the HR Director, and we have a predominantly new committee this year for the 2013 Elected Official Compensation Committee. We do have Karen, who's a returning member, and I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience. And we can begin with that. We are missing one member right now, James Cornish. He'll be here probably in about a half an hour. So we'll get started without him. We do have a guest today, Jeff, who has been on the committee for 3 or 4 years, right? 4 years, and is not on the committee this year, but will be a guest today, and he can start us off with the rules of the committee prior to electing the chairperson. All right? So we'll get started with that. And do you mind beginning, Karen?
Karen Lang, I'm the Human Resource Director for the City of Grants Pass, and I've been on the committee. Jeff's been on 4 years, I've been on 4 years, because I think we've been on the same amount of time.
Andy Schulberg, private citizen, no government involvement today. Business owner, run a sports car shop, run mini storage. Past involvement in this type of a subject would be my background in electronics and management for 18 or so years.
My name is Ann Bryan. I'm a relatively new resident of the county. Most recently a development director for universities, in other words fundraising. But prior to that, I 10 years was an owner of a pretty large agribusiness and a 10,000 head feedlot. And I also spent some time in a software development company in Seattle as one of its officers. And right now we have a little tiny farm in Josephine County, which has chickens and sheep and pasture.
Jeff, would you mind joining us at the table? So my role today is just to host the committee and provide information. So once the chairperson is elected, they will be running the meeting. But if you don't mind, Jeff, if you could tell the committee a little bit about the rules of the committee so that they know the process, and then we'll move into electing a chairperson.
I think the thing to remember is that what you're engaged in is a two-step process. The first step is legally mandated to consist of consideration of comparable compensation in comparable counties and to the extent available against the private sector. The public information is easy enough to obtain because those comparator counties need the same information from us, so they cooperate. The private sector information, at least over the last 4 years, has been virtually impossible to get because there's nothing in it for the private company. They don't have to answer the question, they don't get anything out of it, it's a waste of their time. They generally prefer to maintain their privacy. So you can try to obtain that information, but that has not been productive over at least the last 4 years. So the first step that you are specifically charged with is a consideration of comparable compensation. And on the basis of that, you make a recommendation. Now, as dissatisfying as it may seem, 100% of the authority over elected officials' compensation is reserved to the Budget Committee. You get to make a recommendation. That recommendation satisfies a legal requirement. The Budget Committee is constrained by your recommendation in no manner, shape, or form. They can accept or reject your recommendations in whole or in part, and then do what they consider appropriate in the circumstances that they have to deal with. So if you think of the scope of your charge as being focused on that comparative analysis to provide compensation fairness or some vision of fairness, that's the first step that you're engaged in. Your chairman or his or her delegate will make a presentation to the budget committee in one of their earlier meetings, and that is the end of your involvement in the budget process. They pick it up from there, and over the course of the last 4 years, I believe the budget committee rejected in its entirety this committee's recommendations all 4 years.
I think for the sheriff, they did go on for a couple of years without recommendation. Mainly because the law, it had to do with that.
Actually, you're right, but he wound up kicking that back, so the net result wasn't kind of the same. You're right, they did provide some opportunity for raises for the sheriff. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
No. Any questions for Jeff before he
Since
back
back
to the
then?
audience?
Is the budget committee constrained in any way? We are constrained by what they wish to accept or reject of our recommendations, but does the budget committee have autonomy?
No, they can do what they deem appropriate. The budget committee, some of whom are here, consists of 6 people. 3 commissioners and 3 people chosen from the public. And I've never served on that committee, but it's I think a daunting task to be conducted in public.
But they can then make what choices they wish to make. They don't have
They-
any parameters around them? Or
They can exclude pieces of what you recommend. They can give raises above what you recommend. They can deny raises that you recommend. They conceptually could reduce somebody's salary.
Okay. So they're pretty open to it. They have the ability to make those choices.
Well, they have to deal with the checkbook. You're not
Okay.
necessarily constrained by that sense of reality.
Mhm.
I am assuming then that the budget committee then present the commission, the commissioners have a meeting and they do the final adoption of the budget. The commissioners do. So the budget committee, they give a recommended approval of the budget, and then it's the commissioners before June 30th have to adopt a budget, and at that time they can also change, the commissioners can make changes in what the budget committee recommends. And I'm saying that because I'm basing it on what the city does, and I'm assuming the county is the same, has the same parameters.
The commissioners do adopt the final budget, but I think if they changed what the budget committee recommended on this matter, there might be a bit of a conflict there because of the charter. And the county charter does designate that the budget committee changes elected officials' compensation, and the commissioners are elected officials. So it's kind of a circular process there.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so James has joined us. This is James Cornish, and Jeff was the prior chairperson, so he was giving a mini introduction to the committee, and then we're going to go ahead and move into electing a chairperson. But if you don't mind introducing yourself and your experience as it relates to the committee, we would appreciate that.
So my name is James Cornish. I'm the CFO for a company in Grants Pass called A1A, which is a medical distributing company. I've been there for over 4 years. Prior to that, I was the CFO at Mount Instruments, which manufactures meteorological equipment. All told, in both companies, there's probably about 100 employees in each company. In my current company, I'm dealing mainly with professional salespeople, office staff, things like this. So I've been involved in the setting the salaries and things like this, and compensation for those people.
All right, so we're at the point where we need to go ahead and elect a chairperson. Do we have any nominations? This is always the fun part.
I'm going to nominate Danny. Is that fair? You're a newcomer too.
Thank you, I'm not fit for that. My personal opinion.
Would you care to be? Oh, yeah, last one in the group gets nominated.
In fact, if you had come in just a couple minutes later, it'd be a done deal.
Well, Karen is the only returning.
Yeah, actually.
And I said, I am not able to attend the April 30th meeting where we present. No, so someone else would have to delegate. I'd have to delegate that to someone else to present to the budget committee.
Well, maybe I'll withdraw my nomination and defer to your experience. Would that be suitable, I think?
I've almost gotten out of this.
So I hear a nomination.
I second it.
A second. All in favor of Karen as the chairperson?
Aye.
Thank you.
That would be me.
Well, I think it will be helpful to have somebody who's done this before.
Okay. So now I will be stepping out of coordinating, running through the meeting, and Karen will be taking over. But if you have any questions for me, I can participate as needed.
We do have an official agenda, and so the next thing on our agenda is our own discussions. I think everyone was provided with a packet from Sarah, and in that packet, we had the agenda, the ORSs that we need to follow, and then the comparable data for what we have done is, it's 5 up, 5. We did 5 up, 5 down, I didn't count. The 5 up, 5 down counties, that's just common of what a lot of cities do, or cities and counties when they do comparators, they go 5 up and 5 down. So, and it's all done by population.
I'm sorry, Karen, it's 4 up.
4 up, 4 down.
So you're meaning 4 with a larger population and 4 with a smaller?
Correct. There has been discussion in the past years in this committee about using the counties that by population, because there's been, I think, discussions over, are they really comparable to us in what we do? But it is it's the way it's done. Over at the city, we do it 5 up, 5 down for what we do. The populations are put out there. Portland State University does the population studies, and that's where the populations come from, and that's where you base them on. And then Sarah does the legwork for us, and these come from, it's called the Association of Oregon Counties, which is a group that is nice enough to compile all this information. In the past, I think, Sarah, you've had to compile before we got me.
They've always done it since I've been here. AOC, it's a third party, and they gather the data and provide it to us along with all the other counties.
Which is good. In the city, we don't have that luxury to do it yourself. It's a lot of work. So you have all of those comparators, and then you're given a summary of the comparisons with, and then where Josephine County stands, and then it lists the percent of whether the elected official is higher or lower than the comparables. What we added in our comparison, because some counties pay PERS and some don't.
Excuse me, but would you tell me what PERS is?
PERS is the employees' pension plan,
Oh, right.
public employees' retirement system. If you get the paper, you read a lot about PERS. But the county has to pay a certain amount themselves for everybody, but there's a 6% amount that employees have to put into the account, and some places the county pays that 6%, and other places the employee is responsible for it. And for Josephine County, the employees are responsible for the PERS, the 6%. So we added the 6% in your comparison summary because it does increase your total compensation package. If the county is paying for that, it increases. And so that's why you have a second page with the PERS included, and it does make a difference in the averages. because Josephine County does not pay for the PERS. So we were also supplied with that. We also, then in your packet, you had the past decisions of this committee and what was presented to the county, to the budget committee, and then also their decisions.
And there was one page missing, I don't know, going through the copier, I guess the page didn't come through. And so this is the second page of that first recommendation. My apologies for that.
There you go.
So it's, I guess what, if you have, we want to discuss or talk about if you've gone over the comparators, if you have any, conversation of what we saw or reviewing it. I guess just to actually look it over and see where we stand as far as where we are in comparison. And also, I guess, a decision whether you want to look at the one with the PERS or without the PERS.
So we are limited to looking at this. And I have to say, when I looked at this, I thought some of these counties clearly are more affluent by far. I didn't realize it was a population-based decision. I'm not sure how relevant the population is. I took some look at median incomes in all these counties, and ours is considerably lower than most of them. That seemed to me a more realistic thing to look at, is our income in this county, our tax base, rather than what Umatilla County is doing, where I think, I don't remember what's there, but something. Certainly, and I realize that some of our salaries are less than, but it would be helpful, I think, if we looked at something else. And is there any requirement that we don't do that?
Well, the majority of the reason for using that scope is because all other county employees are measured under that lens because of arbitration. We have unions, we have binding arbitration, and if wages go to an arbitrator, that's the method they use. They use comparable sized counties to measure adequate compensation, and that's statutory. So that's all other county employees, that's the method used in elected officials and fall under county employees when they do, although they're elected. So that's part of the reason. The other assumption is that the population being served by county employees is adequate in measuring the scope of duties and expertise and qualifications required to serve that size of a county. So there's that also.
And the ORS states that you have to, comparably employ in, and you said, as Sarah just said, most entities, the comparator that they use is by size. And believe me, this has been discussed. It comes up each year. Why are we looking at these counties? But this is the way it's done.
I have a question on the cost of living, and I noticed that they haven't been handing out the cost of living for the elected officials, but they do for the rest of the county employees. And do we know if the rest of the counties that we're comparing to have a cost of living adjustment?
For the elected officials, we do know that. It says on the top of each worksheet. So, for example, if you look at Yamhill County, let's see. I think it's actually. Last salary increase, it's on the second set of.
Do you have a page number?
On the first page of each of the county comparator information from AOC,
Okay.
toward the bottom of the page for each of the reports, there's a last salary increase noted there. So we wouldn't necessarily know if that was deemed a COLA or increase based on the compensation committee recommendation.
On Benton, it said they got a salary increase in 12, but it doesn't say what it was. I'm noting that many of these salary increases are there, but they were, some of them were years ago. According to the data we received, for the summary that was put together, we've got when you bring in the PERS, many of the salaries are showing that they're below the average, below what other counties are receiving. We weren't doing badly before the PERS, and then brought the PERS in, and some of them changed. Sarah, you might explain to the committee their surveyor, because that one is always a question. It looks way off, and it's because of how our surveyor's paid.
Yeah, on the comparison summary that doesn't have the PERS, there's some notes at the bottom, and I do believe it does say here. The asterisks, the 5 asterisks down at the bottom, Josephine County Surveyor compensation is based on 20 hours a month. Mm-hmm. He's part-time, that's why his salary is low.
Was there another part to that he gets paid by the job or something else by departments, or is it
if he
just
goes over 20 hours a month, he can turn in a time sheet and get compensated at, I think it was 30 something an hour.
And that is something we talked about, I believe it was last year's meeting, that was that $30 an hour that we also can look at, was $30 an hour a fair wage for when the surveyor's, getting paid by the hour.
$32 an hour for hours in excess of 20 per month. So at a full-time equivalent, the 20 hours per month is $32 an hour. Mm-hmm. And that's on the recommendation. There's a salary table there.
And I assume he doesn't get benefits as well because of the hours?
He does. He gets a county contribution for the insurance benefits.
Okay.
If I could interject, Madam Chairman, the history on that is that the time was calculated to cover the benefits. And so his compensation is kind of fixed based on what the benefits cost. We figure out how many hours that is that he needs to, in essence, work off, or we pay, and then he charges above that at his, professional surveyor's rate, whatever he charges in his private. He maintains a private practice just right down the street also.
Okay. If you took the 2,080 hours, which is a normal full-time position, times $32 an hour, the salary would be about $66,000. But if you strictly made $32 an hour. Any other questions or comments on what we have, the comparisons? don't know if anybody else in the room or had privilege, had this information. I can just let you know what it said, what we came out with. And it's the one with the PERS. The assessor with PERS was down 3.58%. The clerk was up 0.93%. Commissioner was down 0.95%. The district attorney is up 2.28%. Legal counsel down 2.12%. The sheriff down 8.76%. We won't give the surveyors because we just talked about it. Because it says he's down 88%. So it just looks bad. And then the treasurer is down 7.96%.
Now, clarify for me, is this an average of the other comparable counties? Or how did we, if you look at the assessor, which says 71,902, how do we know it's minus 3.5%? What were you comparing it to get that number?
We took the average of the 4 up, 4 down, above, and came up with that, and then compared that to what Josephine County elected
So it is the
officials
average of the other
Right.
counties you're comparing.
And I said, without the PERS mixed in, there was only there was 2 positions that were down. That was the sheriff at 3.97 and the treasurer at 2.44%. And I'm trying to remember, I did go back and read this. Didn't we lower the treasurer's salary last year? We had found that in looking at these salary, the comparisons, the assessor and the clerk and were making the $71,902, and the treasurer was had a different, much, I believe, was higher salary. We talked it over in the committee, said that we thought that in comparison they had probably the same responsibilities, duties, and so we recommended that they all be put on the same salary schedule, and that was changed last year. And now I see it's putting below salary, but we thought that was a fair recommendation last year.
It just seems to me that there needs to be some consideration of the county's financial position. That whether it's fair or not might be a question compared to other counties, but whether we have the money to pay is another question, and that's the one I'm interested in. We're trying to have another tax election, and I'm hearing people complain about it. It seems to me that many of the county officials, what with benefits, are paid pretty darn well for this county. And people are a little bit angry at being asked to consider another property tax increase when they don't see anybody else giving anything up. Lots of people are underemployed, lots of people are unemployed, and the county's revenues are down. So it seems like this is one place where one might look at that and say, is there something we could do differently? Now, it sounds like this committee doesn't have a lot of ability to do other than to recommend that. But I think this committee should consider the financial state of the county. You can't just keep saying, well, we'd like to give people a cost of living adjustment. We'd like to make sure they're fairly compensated if there isn't the money to pay them. And that concerns me greatly.
And I'll just interject, and I'll try not to interject too much during the committee discussion, but I want to point out that the Budget Committee's role is that ability to pay. Mm-hmm. And this compensation committee is comprised to look at equity, fairness, market rate, comparable county rate, and say what should the rate of pay be. And then the Budget Committee accepts or declines that based on dollars.
Okay, well, that's reassuring.
And hence we come forward with, not in a raise in pay or whatever, but to say, it should be equal to whatever the other city employees get. I'm sorry, I keep doing that because I'm too used to city talk. County employees get, and whatever COLA they get. And I think there was a time where they were getting some COLAs. And then we have also the ability to just raise their salaries, not based on COLA, just say we think the care comparators, they should be higher or lower. But we've been putting in the recommendation for equity, it should at least match whatever the other employees get. And that's where the budget committee each year has said, no, they have not accepted that recommendation of giving them whatever COLA. And there were some years where the employees had gotten some from a raise. We do have a page in here we'll show you historically what percentage of the employees have received. And so in 2000,
Just to make it easier to find.
yeah, it's
I
after,
don't see page number.
no, it's
Mine on it.
it's right after your charter, the Oregon law,
Before the AOC.
it's just before your comparative page.
Okay.
So in 2012,
That's my computer number different.
the elected officials got 0, but the non-union got 3.8. So, you know, our recommendation would have been that everybody gets 3.8. The budget committee said no when they got 0. So the discussion, our discussion, can be if you look at the sheriff, that he's way down, and we think that we should recommend, he's up now. As Jeff said, we can recommend. There is a law, I guess it isn't actually an ORS, that states that the sheriff cannot make less than the person
Subordinate.
subordinate.
That's common
We had
sense.
to correct that, is that 2 years ago or 3 years? We had to make that correction.
Last 2 years.
Because the undersheriff had been here so long that he was at the top of the salary range, that he is now retired. So that, and I don't think the position has been filled, but if it was, whoever came in, the assumption would be coming in and starting over up the step scale.
Right.
So we don't have that problem anymore, but we did have that problem the last couple of years. So we corrected it, and then it was the sheriff's decision to not take it, or there's also rules on that. He can't not take it, he has to take it and give it back or something, but he chose not to. So I just said there are a couple that are showing that they're down salary-wise, but the question is, do we change that? Do we think it's fair? Or do we, with having them in the back of our minds, is there the ability? Is it a prudent time to say we increase salaries for people or for elected officials?
I think it would be ludicrous for this committee to recommend an increase, and I understand, but I just heard that it's not our purview to consider the realities of life in this county, but I think we ought to consider realities of life in this county, and that would be in our report. And even if it goes beyond our purview, we as a committee should take that upon ourselves to be real people, to speak honestly to ourselves and to the county and to the constituents about what this county really, the direction this county really needs to go. We just heard testimony that our recommendations are going to be rejected most likely in their entirety, as they have been for the past at least 4 years straight.
It's quite a track record.
There's a 100% track record of rejecting whatever we say. So my personal feeling is we should speak from our hearts and put it down, make our recommendation. And if it goes beyond the limitation that we're trying to place upon ourselves, then I think that's the direction we have to go.
I agree. I understand that the rejections over the past 4 years were because the committee had said, to be fair, there should be some cost of living adjustment, and the budget committee, understanding the financial situation, said no. So I guess I'm glad the committee's recommendations were rejected. But I certainly agree, if we do nothing more than say this is what we as a committee feel, and if we all agree on that and vote on that, we can take a look at the fairness issue and answer that if we need to. But I think I agree with you, we should also put our own opinions, our very strong opinions, if we have them. We're supposed to be representing citizens, and my interest in being on this group was because I had heard so many people complaining and not understanding and feeling like it wasn't fair, and some of the elected officials seem to be making an awful lot of money in benefits compared to what their constituents are making. And that, I would like to be able to answer that question more reasonably when people bring it up. The fact that 2 of the commissioners themselves have suggested that the commissioners' salaries be lowered is significant. And I don't know if they have the ability to do that or not through this budgeting process, but they have certainly recognized that it's a big issue.
I mean, looking at it from the private industry, I mean, I look at the salaries and I think, like, I'm not sure what experience the treasurer has, but to me, the salaries are really low. I mean, I've got clerks that, with a high school education that, are making close to what these people are making, sort of thing, So, and we can talk about the budget of the county and stuff like this, but I guess in some regard, I mean, I think these tax increases that keep getting voted down, sort of thing, I guess somebody has some personal opinion as to whether they should be going through. I think we've got one of the lower county tax rates, so.
The lowest in the state.
So we're willing to put up with lack of sheriff and everything else and all the other services,
Well, I think some of it's willing, some of it is ability. This is one of Oregon's lower income counties. By I don't know if it's not the lowest income, but it's very close.
Well,
And you'll have an opportunity, okay?
Thank you.
That's part of the reason why we look at comparators, and I understand your argument, or what you're saying as far as there's other people in the county who aren't making these kind of salaries, but you have a group of people here that are doing a job. They're not just elected officials who come to work and don't do anything, figureheads. The commissioners have to work 8 to 5, they all have to work, and so they're getting a fair wage for a fair job, and that's what these comparators are telling you. If you look also in the rest of the comparator information, it tells you how many people in the different counties they supervise, how big it is, and this type of thing. And I think that's what you're trying, these wages are not out of line when you compare them, looking at what I can look at, what the people in the city are making, and this is an ongoing argument all the time, is are they getting a fair wage for what they're doing? And so I think you really have to take that into consideration. I understand Josephine County is what they might consider poor county or whatever, however you want to say it, and there is a lot of unemployment. But it's running a county is a huge undertaking, and there's a lot of employees. There's a lot of I can look over at Sarah. I know what comparing her salary to mine, and I think she's underpaid for what she does, and because it's a big job, and so the elected officials, and you run for the office for it's something that you really want to do, but they also know that they're getting a certain salary for doing a job.
Well, it's clear that most of these positions have very clear qualifications that are necessary. You're not going to be the treasurer without having that sort of skill set, and I do understand that.
Is it possible to hear from some of the elected officials?
And that's next on the agenda. And if we're done with what we want, we just kind of tossing around what we have. The next thing on the agenda is that we open discussion. What we normally do is the first open discussion is actually the elected officials talking for themselves, for their talk about their salary, because there's been changes in the county over a few years. They used to get, there's things that you can say they used to get and no longer get. And so over the, I don't know how many years it's been, their salaries have gone down. Not their base salary, but some of the extra things that deferred comp and the PERS payments that they receive. So we can hear from them, and then after the elected officials, then we also can open up to have anyone from the public who is in the room who would like to speak. So if we want to move on to that section.
I'm not trying to push things.
No, no, it's fine. I mean, it's.
I'd like to get some input.
Right. And I said this some of these, the comparisons and stuff, this is all, kind of new to you, so you understand where we're coming from. So, open it up to any elected officials who are in the room who would like to speak toward their salaries, and just, if you'll just state your name and what your position is, and if you'd like to speak to the group.
Hi, I'm Steve Rich. I'm the legal counsel. Connie's reminding me that the county clerk, I misspoke. The county clerk, Art Harvey, put together a sheet that just shows that what the COLAs have been for. In fact, I'll give these to Sarah, and she can pass these out with other material. But it just shows the COLAs that the other employees have gotten, and they're cumulatively $5,000 to $7,000 that the elected officials haven't gotten that the other employees have. Just to make that maybe more concrete, I would point out that our chief deputy district attorney and my salary at one point in time were pegged at the same level. No complaints. But when you look at what's happened since 2008, 2009, her salary's gone from $94,000 to about $104,000, which is, and I would tell you, I think she's worth more than that. But that's what happens when the elected officials' compensation hasn't been adjusted from the base level, with the exception, I think, of the sheriff, since 2003. We've gotten COLA since 2003, but the last time there was an adjustment, I think, was the fiscal year 2002, 2003. So the other thing about the demographics, we all live here. We're all anxious to get, some of us maybe, are anxious to get reelected. And so, you have to justify what I'm being paid and why I think I'm earning the money. I've always thought it'd be real interesting, and I've made this comment probably more often than Jeff would like to recall, but instead of comparing income with a huge retirement community that we have, why don't we compare deposits, money on deposits? And if you compare that, you'll see that Josephine County is way up there in the top 3, 4, 5 counties. So when you say we're a poor county, we have not a lot of income in this county. I'm not so sure that translates to, wealth. But I wanted to say also, I personally, and I think every other elected official, appreciates what you've done by stepping up and agreeing to spend your time doing this. We hear a lot of times as we go through this from year to year to year, people want to make a recommendation that I'll call political, our hearts. But the statutory commission that you have is to look at comparator salaries. And so I would urge you to say, rather than have a person who thinks all public employees should get huge raises. I don't know where they are, but I've heard that there are people like that out there. They think all public employees deserve a huge raise, or that they should all be cut and work for half of what they're getting right now. It maintains the purity of the process. If you say, we looked at our statutory responsibilities, we did that, and now you turn it over to the budget committee, who are working with a piece of pie that is only so big, and then they have to make the allocations. If the political judgment comes from this appointed group, then all you have to do is get the right set of commissioners who nominate people who want to give them a raise, and then you're off track. And so I think you're safest to stay on the track of fulfilling your statutory commission. So again, thank you, and I appreciate you volunteering to undertake the task.
Steve, can you remind me of when it was that you had deferred comp at one time, and then you lost that, and then the PERS you started having to pay your own PERS.
Josephine County has always required the employees to pay their own PERS. For example, the city, and I think if you look at some of the other comparators, the vast majority of them pick up, that's what they call it, pick up of the employees 6%. And, you know, fact of the matter is, if you pay 6% and I get to keep 6%, that's a 6% raise for me. One of the things that you know, you try to think about different options. And I don't know the answer to this, but you know, if you didn't give an increase in compensation to the elected officials, we said, okay, they've gotten a COLA for 4 or 5 years and no adjustment, we're going to set up a health savings account for each one of the elected officials and put in 2 or 3 thousand, whatever they thought was fair. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head again. I apologize for that. But the other thing that some of the counties do is award longevity pay. That way you don't have a person coming into office, as you mentioned, 2 of the commissioners who are saying, you know, wow, we can afford to take big cuts. Well, after you've been here for 8 or 9 or 10 years, maybe you feel like you're earning your money. And instead of increasing the base salary, if you had a way to reward longevity in office, then you wouldn't have the ratcheting up effect of increasing the base salary, but just granting call it whatever, a longevity paid bonus or some kind of factoring in for that.
Seniority.
Were you talking to me?
The deferred comp match, I believe, went away in 2006. Which was major cuts based on the timber revenue decline. And the county never picked up the 6% PERS, as Steve mentioned. The other erosion of their base compensation came about with the increase in the employee portion of health benefits costs. So it would be those 2 primary factors, the deferred comp match going away and the rise in employee health benefit costs.
And I apologize for not answering that part of your
Oh, that's
question. That was in 2006, I think.
6 is what I thought.
5 or 6 is when they stopped putting in deferred comp match up with a limit, a cap of 6%.
And when Sarah talks about the employee benefits, it's one of the things that we look at is total compensation. You know, you can look at base salary, but when you look at total compensation, that's where it plays in on whether or not the 6% it gets paid or not. Employee benefits is also a big part of it, and how much we have to pay. One of the other things that both the city and the county are facing almost every year is that premiums keep going up on health insurance, and that's something we really have no control over. So you either change the benefit plan and, you know, higher deductible, whatever you have to do, or you have employees do more cost sharing. So it is part of total compensation. So.
And do you have a value what your benefit package is?
Well, that's here on the worksheet.
Okay.
Now, just for the health benefits alone, the county contributes, I believe it's $875 this year. But the employee portion has gone up quite a bit, about $90, say 3-4 years ago, for the best plan, which has been eroded since then with higher copays and deductibles, to about $300 for that best plan. But yeah, did you find that worksheet that was Karen has it? Okay, it's in the summary of compensation, the first page. It's the total taxes and benefit cost.
It's at the end of this.
I reorganized it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it's right there.
I felt it needed a little bit of, okay.
So the top there for assessor, 71,902 for the salary, and then total taxes and benefits, 42 for a total of 114.
First of all, I don't expect to get a raise. I'm not anticipating one. I do believe that the budget committee will make that political decision, but that's what it is. It's a political decision, and I don't believe that under the statutes that that's what this committee should be doing, is making that political decision. Leave that to the budget committee. That's their role. What I would point out, and you can see it in that sheet that that Steve passed out, that Art had put together. I would first of all mention that in many counties, the assessor is an appointed position, it's not an elected, as well as the legal counsel is often appointed, as well as the treasurer is often appointed, as well as the surveyor. Okay, am I missing anybody? Most of these can be appointed or elected depending, and in this county it's elected because of our county charter. If we were appointed positions, the compensation COLAs that the other non-union managers have been getting, we would have been getting. The only reason we didn't get them is because we're elected. So we are being treated differently in that sense. And that's the only reason. If we were appointed, we would have got them. Every year, my salary has been the same from, I think we got a COLA my first year, that 1%, and that's the last I've seen. Every year, my paycheck is a little bit less than it was the year before because of the health expenses and everything else going on. I'm not suggesting that I want a raise. I don't expect one. But I do think it needs to be out there, the fact that we have not been getting them. I think people need to be aware that we have not been getting them. And I believe that it needs to be addressed under that equity as the statute requires. And yes, I would think it's probably a futile exercise, but I think it's necessary in the process to at least put that forward that, if we are being under the other counties, then a recommendation that we be brought forward. I know it's not going to go anywhere, but I think that that's the statement that ought to be made to show that, we are the lower. That's all.
Well, I think your point about elected versus appointed is significant, because you're right, in other places it might not be the case. That is certainly a point to think about, and for the budget committee to think about also, even in terms of the appointed positions.
Anyone else, any other elected official wish to speak?
Not raise my hand because I'm elected official, but you mentioned that two of the commissioners would like to see their salary changed.
They have said so,
Yeah,
and Keith Heck has more than one time.
public has heard that.
Yeah.
So would it be appropriate for this committee to ask at least those commissioners to come forth and say what's on them?
I think Keith's here. Okay. Do you want to speak to this?
Well, I think the proposal that was given is explanatory. I mean, as far as what the expectation is, it's not it applies to the new incoming. The sitting one would be grandfathered for the 2 years. When a new commissioner is elected, then there is would all then be at the same level. But part of the difficulty I've gotten into, because I was on this, I was on the budget committee for 2 years before I actually sat as a commissioner, is trying to get the budget committee, and we talked about it for the first time, and went down the second year, last year, the only way that it was, anyway, getting past that, it was said that the commissioners could not establish their own salary, that had to come out of the budget committee. And the recommendation for the salary from the elected employees compensation committee had to be the genesis of that. So that's the reason for this presentation, because I will continue to lobby for a reduction of the commissioners' salaries for several reasons, but I do think it is it's necessary to be done, if for no other reason than to establish a concept of goodwill amongst the county residents. Yeah, your points address that very thing. I don't like to get into the comparisons between who's rich, who's not rich, because then we're pitting one group of people against another, and that's a death knell for our county. But I think that there should be a reduction suggested by this committee to the budget committee for the very reason that you were enunciating.
And that enables the budget committee to address that issue.
Yes.
If I'm understanding
Yes.
correctly, you kind of got put into a corner when the budget committee said we can't even talk about it if the elected officials review committee hasn't come up with this thought. So we do have a role to play in putting something on the table, then you're saying.
Yeah, last year, the budget, this committee, in Jeff's presentation, this committee, he was saying, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Jeff, but he did not see that, or the committee did not see that, is in your purview to establish the salary for the commissioners. Mm-hmm. And so they deferred to that. They just excised that out from the recommendations made and simply gave that to the budget committee to come up with. Mm-hmm. And I skipped a loop in there as far as what we're trying to do it. So
You mentioned a proposal. Did you,
Yes.
is there a proposal that we are supposed to?
I
have
gave
in
it to
front of
Sarah
us?
back on January 7th, my first official day in the job.
I recall a notice that you gave me that was addressed to the budget committee. Did you give me something to give to the elected?
I gave a proposal of salaries and reasons.
Yeah, I was not aware of a document to come to the elected official compensation committee at this point in time for this year. Had I known that, then I would have most certainly forwarded along.
Yeah,
Thought it was
I
a
turned it
general
into you on
notice.
January 7th.
Mr. Heck, is that a document that you'd like this committee to see?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I have a copy of it and I'll go get it. I did not realize
All right.
that it was,
That's
and
okay.
it might have been addressed to this
Well,
committee
that's-
some time ago, but I'll go get it.
I think she's a well-organized woman.
I'll say-
She is a well-organized
January 7th, a long
woman.
time ago.
I can tell that she is.
I would take this opportunity to interject, I guess, at this point. I'm not sure what Mr. Heck was told. Certainly it wasn't by me that the budget committee could only reduce commissioners' salaries if that was recommended by this committee. That didn't come from me. I think that would be certainly within the purview of this committee to say, we've gotten a request from the commissioners, and our recommendation is that, you follow that. But that is, under the charter, in my legal opinion, is the requirement of the budget committee to set those salaries.
They can do whatever they want.
The budget, yeah,
Basically can.
And if they don't have a direction from this committee, then there's no direction that they'll possibly bring up, because there isn't a direction from this committee. So what I'm hearing is if there is a direction from this committee, possibly they may bring that up for discussion.
well, and my point would be that legally, the budget committee can scrap your recommendations,
Yeah.
cut salaries and raise salaries, because it's totally within their discretion. What the individual commissioners can't do is to say, I want my salary set here. Because frankly, if you could adjust your salary like that, it's punitive income as far as the IRS goes. Well, wait a minute, you had a right to get it, and you just didn't take it. That issue came up a long time ago with the previous commissioner who was drawing Social Security, and he said, no, I don't want it. And they said, well, that's punitive income to you because you could have had it. The budget committee has the legal authority to set that. I mean, we've had other elected officials who've donated part of their salary back.
So that's
Well, from
rather
a tax standpoint, you know, you're paying money for the ability to donate.
But that's,
I did find this proposal that said it was to be introduced at a regular commissioners' weekly meeting. It wasn't addressed to budget committee or elected official comp committee at that time. There is a note below that you said you'd like it reviewed annually by this committee, and the committee does review it every year. So maybe Karen could read this out loud too.
I want to just clarify what Steve was saying in my mind, so I know. The budget committee is the place where these salaries can be set. Once it gets to the commissioners to adopt a budget, at that point, they could not say for themselves, oh, we're going to adopt the budget, but we're going to increase our own salaries by this much. They would have to take that recommendation from the budget committee.
That's never happened. And because of the way our charter doesn't perfectly made up with the statute. For example, and I think Sarah included in there, the statutory provisions that talk about this committee.
Right.
This committee makes recommendations to the commissioners. Well, we don't do that because the commissioners don't set the salaries. It's the budget committee. So, you know, we've kind of adopted the theory that, well, in order to comply with the statute, we send it off to the commissioners, but then they carry it as you know, to the budget committee, and the chairman of this committee in the past has come and spoken to the budget committee. You know, in a county without a charter, the commissioners can reduce the budget by any amount. You can increase it by 10%. Now, when you're budgeting all your revenue, I don't know where that extra 10% comes from. I mean, except by reducing proposed contingencies or something else. But under our charter, it's the budget committee that sets that compensation.
You have to have a balanced budget. That's why Steve's saying if you up something, you better have something down here that you can, because you have to have a balanced budget.
counties and states cannot print money.
Okay, I will read this on your behalf, Sarah. Since the citizens taxpayer of Josephine County have been burdened with increasing costs and falling personal disposal incomes, and since the Josephine County operating budget has been reduced by almost 60% over the preceding 5 years, and since the Josephine County Budget Committee does not establish commissioner salaries, but the salaries are annually determined by the commissioners, and since the county commissioners are the chief executive officers of the county who can only effectively lead by example, I propose that the salary of the newly elected county commissioners, positions 2 and 3, be reduced from $75,000 to $50,000 annually, a 33% reduction, effective January 7, 2013. Position 1 salary will remain at the current level of $75,000 until either re-election or the election of a new commissioner, at which time the salary will be reduced to rate of the lowest paid commissioner. All future salary decisions for individual commissioners shall be annually reviewed and recommended by the elected officials' compensation committee. So that's his proposal. Any other elected officials that would like to speak at this time to their salaries? And I open it to the public. Any comments from the public? Yes, sir. Just state your name.
Yeah, my name is Larry West, and the only variant I have is I had 3 years appointed to the budget committee, plus another year I sit in for a person who had to leave. And I've also worked for 6 county commissioners over a 4-year period. And so I've been through this probably more than anybody but Steve Rich in this room. And so I picked up on some things. One, very clearly, the budget committee establishes policy for the county. And that is 100% review of Keith, Simon Hare, and Cheryl Walker. And this committee is 100% confined to comparables only. Not to represent people, to represent comparisons and numbers only. This, nothing more that I said, reinforces what Rich has said in different words. completely, sincerely, that's what it is. And again, this committee has to be without influence by anybody else. And that influence has already been influenced. You've got a letter before you from Keith to influence you. It's outside comparable numbers. Now that leads to a couple of things, because the county commissioners can always, in a budget committee meeting, or one of the three independent people on that committee, make a motion to do exactly what Keith says. That's the way to do this properly, in compliance with ordinances and law. The second way they can do it, which is the precedence in this county, Dwight Ellis, a former county commissioner, he took a percent of his income and wrote a check back to the county to accomplish the same thing. And the sheriff has been doing the same thing for 4 years. So that is really how it's done, without crossing boundaries, without getting in hot water, without getting into ethical relapses with the public, and without getting your name biased in the newspaper. So what I'm saying right here is clear delineation of your accountability, your responsibility, not only by charter, but also state law. Steve will back me up on this. I hope I've made it clear. The county commissioners have the ultimate authority, and they have several ways they can reduce their salaries. In fact, Keith proposed one last year. It didn't go over, but it may well this year. But that's the proper venue and the proper process. But again, this committee right here, you can't make the representation decisions for these commissioners. That's their elected duty. And that's simply that. You don't want bias from an outside source, pure and simple. And I'm thinking you're walking down a narrow path right here, just with the proposal that you have before you. So that's what I have to say on that issue.
Dale?
Thank you.
You have a great opportunity. You've got the greatest opportunity that's happened in years, because I'm sitting in on these meetings for the last couple of years. This is the first time I've noticed that 2 members of the board, maybe 3, are seriously questioning the comparators, because you've been told that's your entire job, is the comparators. Beverly Hills has almost exactly the same population, off by a couple dozen, than Grants Pass. Beverly Hills median family income is more than twice that of Grants Pass. And our chief financial officer and some other members that are elected officials, they make more than the median family income in Beverly Hills all by themselves. Now, how does this happen? It happens because your comparators are with similar population places. You're right, this is not the first time this has come up. You have the complete power now, 3 of you, to say, you know what? That system is flawed. We don't like that. We've heard from Sarah Moy, says, well, it's the way we've always done it. We've heard from our chairperson, who is dependent on that system at the city. You've heard from Steve Rich, who's told you to stay within the statutes. You've been warned, but you have the capability for the first time to say, you know, there's something wrong with that system. We don't like that system. That just doesn't work. And you have the ability to say, we're going to need to have another meeting, because now we want to have not just given to us, oh, here are your comparators, this is what you got to work with. You could say, nope, those comparators just don't work. Let's have comparators instead. Yes, the amount of work you need to do, of course. But let's compare with counties that have similar income and the same number of people and same kinds of jobs, rather than only by population. You can do this. Now, there'll be a temptation on the part of Steve Rich or some other elected official to want to clarify my statements, but that's the end for the elected officials. It's now the time for citizens. You have been praised for volunteering. You can be praised a lot more than this by your fellow citizens for saying thank you for finally opening that door and saying that's not been fair from the beginning. And they're not going to pay any attention to your suggestions anyway. Remember, they're all going to be thrown out. So what a great opportunity for you. Please do it.
Any other comments from the public?
Just one. Dale brings a good point about Beverly Hills, that Josephine County is about the same population as Beverly Hills, but you're comparing to Beverly Hills. You're not comparing to, Beverly Hills is in the county. Beverly Hills is part of Los Angeles County. Because Los Angeles County has 9 million people in it. If you want to compare 85,000 to 9 million, that's a fair comparison, but it's not. I think if you look at Oregon and compare it to jobs, similar job people in similar positions within the state, I think that's a reasonable comparison. And maybe it's not where the budget committee ends up, but at least it's a place to start. And that is what your task is to do comparisons. You may want to determine different comparisons, and that's appropriate, but it's comparisons. That's where you need to go.
You know, you can get into an endless loop, though, with all this comparison business, because all the other counties are looking around, too, and everybody's, oh, we're going to give a 2% cost of living. You get into a circle where it just keeps ratcheting ever so slightly up, or it stays level, but it never gets looked at structurally, which I think some people have mentioned. Base salaries. If you're running a business and your revenues go down by whatever percent the counties have, you do something. You just can't say, but everybody thinks that they deserve this and it's fair because other companies are paying the same thing for the same kind of job. You have to live within your means. And as Karen said, we've got to balance the county's budget. The budget committee has to. So it doesn't make sense to me to look totally externally for comparisons. I just don't think it makes any sense. We have to also look at our own financial situation and how the citizens of this county feel about it when they're being asked, you know, to make sacrifices also. I'm not sure how we do that in a fair way, but it has bothered me for some time. And then when I understood, and I understood more clearly today than I did before I got here, that this is really all we're supposed to look at, I agree. I think it's a flawed system. I think this should be part of what we look at, but I don't think it should be all of what we consider. And I don't know how to go about doing that now, so I'll ask my fellow committee members to have some ideas here.
Let's, why don't we finish public comment, and then we can go back to discussing.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I was comparing 2 cities, not a city with a county. Pat Fahey is on the budget committee.
Jeff?
Dale's comments imply that the comparator counties have never been challenged. In the 4 years of my participation, we looked at the makeup of the comparator counties each year. And I didn't always happen when Dale was in the room, but it happened every year. And I believe it's part of your agenda. So I think you will come to a point where you look at the counties. I think you will find that the comparator counties are all Oregon counties. I think you will find that of the available Oregon counties, it's not a bad set of comparisons. But there is a part of the process that we have gone through every year I participated that addresses that specific issue.
Yes, sir.
My name is Jerry Smith, and I don't know what I'm doing here, really, to tell you the truth. Anyway, I started looking into Josephine County. I led a committee of 5 people in 2000 when the sheriff's office was in the same straits they are now. And at that time, in September of 2000, we got a double majority, a September election in which it passed, where you have to have the double majority over 50% turnout. And in that time, then I started looking into Josephine County government and what was going on, and it was just appalling in some of the decisions that came from the commissioners. 9 weeks vacation after your first year, managers to employees, 1 manager to every 3 employees, etc. But the main thing that you people are concerned about now is the elected officials. Well, you have to take into consideration that if you are not thinking about this, the elected officials who were defeated, especially commissioners, in the primary in May, and they didn't bother to show up. And there's nothing you can do about it. The same way in the general election, they get defeated, they don't have to come back in the office, they still get paid. One particular sheriff for 1 year never even bothered to come in for half a day. Went home at noon every day. So he's left bad taste in people's mouths throughout the county. They knew what was going on. And I'm not saying this is prevalent amongst the elected officials, but what happens is, no, Steve, you.
You're buying lunch next time.
Yeah, I'll buy lunch, okay. Yeah, but anyway, this is something that has to be overcome, like the people that think the county has all the gold bars stashed in the safe down in the basement. Well, I've been down there and there is no gold bars. But so, by far and large, the elected officials do a good job. And the only way that you can call them up short, if there is malfeasance, etc., like we just went through with one commissioner not too long ago and she wouldn't recall. But that's quite a process to do. So, are their salaries behind? We did a survey back in the mid-2000s, around 2004, 2005, with other comparable counties. And yes, they were very far behind. But then again, we don't have the money. So you can't suck blood from a turnip. And what's going to happen now with this sequester money? Are they going to have to pay it back? There's so many up in the air. Dan, how many committees have you been on for the sheriff's office?
Couple.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Got a committee, been that way throughout the year.
Yes, I see that there he has his name up again, hand up again. It's up to the committee. Normally, you just speak your piece, and it's up to you whether you
I vote in favor.
let him speak or not. Okay.
So I'm here, really?
Okay, just two things.
I do.
If you want to create policy and represent the people, the answer is very, very simple. Get elected. And that's how you do it in democratic. But your appointment is in line with ORS, which demands comparable zoning. So this influence, this outside influence, really gets on the edge of ethics. Is it trying to influence you? And I would just encourage you, and I have to leave right there, to stay within the boundaries. Otherwise, probably disband this particular committee and just set up a new one. Because you do have to stay within those comments.
And I just want to make one, and at first I want to ask anybody else want to speak.
I'd like to say one last thing, man. Because your job is to do the comparators, you can. That's totally within your ability. Please do that. You're going to then set a new precedent in both the city and the county and do us all a big favor. Be brave.
And over the years that I've been on this committee, when it first started, I think the first year I was on, only the elected officials actually came to the meeting and spoke for themselves to give some explanation of what their salaries were. And in the last couple of years, it's been opened up a little more for more public comment from elected officials. And I guess I don't necessarily look at it as influence. I just look at it as, especially for the elected officials, to give some history background and some reasons why they do not, or they feel that where their salary should or shouldn't be. I think, as Jeff has stated, and that I firmly believe that being on this committee, we have pretty much known for the last 3 years or 4 that I've been on it, that our job is only to look at the comparators. We have put in, I think, comments. One year we put in, it would be really nice if we could compare more to private, but we can't. And that was mainly because an elected official came in and said, I'm an attorney, or a district attorney, or shouldn't you be looking at what we make in the private industry? we just can't get those numbers. But we commented on it. We commented on, we really would like more information. And so the next year, we got more information. So we have addressed some of these issues. But always knowing that what our job is to look at the comparators and see where they fall. And and I think, as I said, the only little bit difference is that instead of just doing pure comparators last year, we asked to have that 6% put in just to see what the difference is, because if you look at a full compensation, the 6%, it makes a difference, and they don't get it. So that, I think, that is our job, and we know it's our job. What you can put in your letter when you come forward to the commissioners, we did our job, this is what we did, we were influenced, but we feel that we wish there could be more information. But Sarah gave it to you, it's right here. We have the ORS, or is it an OER, whichever it is.
It's an ORS.
ORS that says what our job is.
One of the components, just to add on to what Karen said, is to take into account such factors as the number of employees supervised and the size of the budget administered by each elected officer, the duties and responsibilities of each, and the compensation paid to subordinates. So our committee recommended to AOC that they add that information to the comparison summaries that go out each year, and they did so. They responded to a request from Josephine County and have now added it, and they distribute this information to all counties so that the counties can better meet their statutory requirements. So I would just recommend that you maybe do take the time to be sure that you read through each of the statutory requirements. There's been a lot of discussion today about what the comparables are, and refresh yourself on that so maybe you haven't already.
And when I do look back in the very first set of these that I received, there was much less information on what the AOC gave us. And it truly was because Sarah contacted them and said, could you please give us more information? And now you have, it's 2 pages of what the information is that we have. So, it's getting late. You had your hand up too, and I spoke. I'm running off at the mouth here.
2 things, and unfortunately Larry was left, but he said the sheriff has returned money to the county for 4 years in a row. I'm interested in what that is because I don't know if we have the answer now, but it would be good for us to know that, I think.
I believe he had what his salary was the very first year, which I have in here somewhere. We raised it because he was because we had to put it in line with the other sheriff. And so whatever that difference was, I believe he has returned. So.
The other thing is, I'm going to use an example here, may or may not be a good example, but the law gives me the privilege of driving. If I can pass the driving test, I get a driver's license. It's not a right, it's a privilege. And the law says, now that you've got the privilege, you can drive your car down that road. All right. The law also says you can't drive it over 65 miles an hour if that's the closest speed limit on that road. So the law says you can do this, but you can't do that. You can't go beyond that line. So it may be a poor example, but I read the ORSs and I understand the point of staying within the parameters. But unless there's more ORS, and I haven't gone to the ORSs to see if there's some text that's not here, it tells us what to do, it directs us, and I agree with that. It doesn't tell us we can't do anything else. There's no limitation in the law. It doesn't say you can't do something else. So I'm wondering where that limitation is coming from. It's not coming from the law. It's coming from an interpretation of the law, or is it coming from the way we've worked in the past? I'm just curious.
And I didn't officially say, I think we officially closed public comment, so it's back to us.
Sorry.
I'm
running off at the mouth.
No, I should have said that, I'm sorry, to close it, because my answer to that, and I'm not the legal we have the legal person sitting in the room, but I think we do, is that it's based on, that's the way we've done it, have always done it. Larry's comments were, he seems to, I don't know if it's because of, he's been at meetings and they said, wait a minute, no, you can't do this, or you can, but we've always, when I've been on the committee, Sarah's given us the ORS, and this is the way it's been interpreted, how we do it. As I said, if you look back in your packet of stuff, of some of the recommendations that we have put forward, we have put comments in there almost every year. And so, I guess that's where you might say we stepped a little bit over. I'm not real sure about this. If we get undue influence that we have to, to stay on the committee.
We get
heard it.
influence from our neighbors, come on.
But I
Influence
think,
walking down.
I think I clarified that. Over the last few years, we've just taken a whole lot more public comment. Either, all of us have taken it from elected officials, but we also have listened to the public, and it just gives us a little more background, a little more, something. I'm sorry, I keep turning my back.
No, it's fine.
Something to, some food for thought. But it still goes back to the comparators. And what Sarah said, there is some leeway in here because you're looking at how big of a department do they run, are they getting paid fairly for the size of the department they have, the number of people, their budget that they have to oversee. And that there are some things that, but it also is, we're comparing that to other counties' large-sized departments and overseeing. I mean, I guess the way they explained it, if the assessor in Benton County is getting a higher salary, but then we look and see he also has a bigger department, more employees, and this is all maybe, then okay, so maybe he's justified for that, but that doesn't mean that we're so far off. So that's the kind of things that we're still comparing. We're just not only comparing the base salaries.
Well, it says in this, number 2, County Compensation Board shall annually recommend a compensation schedule for the county elected officers. Number 3, we shall annually review the compensation paid to comparable persons in the state of Oregon, public bodies, etc. So it doesn't seem to me that we are precluded from making other recommendations. Am I misunderstanding that? The way it's written to me is that it's 2 separate things. It doesn't say the recommendation shall depend upon
Although, I guess,
comparisons.
my concern, what's the basis? I mean, in the private industry, I'd get a performance evaluation, I would get a job description, yada, yada, on and on and on, and I'd use comparables, put it all together. Here, I mean, I personally don't know the job descriptions of each of these elected officials, don't know what the performance evaluations are like and everything else, so it would be difficult for me to make a recommendation other than looking at the comparables, which is really what we've got.
And it says you're supposed to review compensation paid to persons comparably employed. So
required to do that.
that's always been my understanding, and I think that's what this body's worked. The reality of this body's worked under all these years. And I said we've been here a while today. It's a first. What we can do is we've got all these comparators, and I think Sarah has a second meeting set up that we can come back, on our own, really look at these comparators, come back and make some decisions, if that's all right, or unless you want to.
Well, I think we have a better understanding of how to look at
Go
them.
away and come back.
Well, we come back.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We get tired.
Well, you've actually gotten enough, 3 new people, that you've gotten a lot of information in a short period of time.
I just had a comment. In private business, you have all those different factors that you bring forth to set somebody's salary, and one of those in corporate life is when If someone takes on additional responsibilities or loses responsibilities, they take on more people or are responsible for more money of the corporation, they should rightfully make more money. And when they take on less responsibilities, which is less people and a smaller budget, then in corporate life, you change some salaries appropriately. So there is something that we can glean without seeing the protected personnel file. That wouldn't be our purview at all. I wouldn't even want to go there. Not legally allowed to go there, but there are some factors that we can use. We can compare ourselves, say, 10 years ago to today. That's it.
And I was going to ask Sarah, in the comparators, when we bring that up, it does say what their budget is on this form. It doesn't go back, like you don't see last year's, right?
What's your copy of last year?
I'm just, when you talked about that, I have them all because I've been on the committee, whether or not someone's budget in the county has changed so much that they're not as
Or more, because there's massive changes in the county in a while. I live in the county. We all live in the county. We get a lot of information. We read the Courier. It's information that comes to us. There's so many changes. I don't know if somebody's taking on more responsibility because other people have left, for example.
So if you want, she could run you these same comparators from last year.
Sarah.
No, I have copies from last year, and I
That would
think
be
that they
helpful.
have the budgets and FTE supervised added for at least the last 2 years, so I'll get you those.
That would be good. That would be very helpful.
Trying to educate us a little bit.
We have it all here, so if we're in agreement, we just meet, and do you have that date, Sarah?
Yeah, it's on the agenda.
It is on the agenda.
18th at 4, and that meeting will be in the board's office. The Board of County Commissioners' office is right down the hall on the right. They have a conference room there.
Can you email these other comparators like you did the first package? Yes, that would be great.
So we can officially adjourn at 5:35 or wherever we're at, and to meet again on April 18th.